Hello and welcome to the special edition of Access Asia. Russia's war in Ukraine is reverberating not just in the former Soviet Union and the West, but also in Asia, calling into question China and India's ties with Moscow and what it could mean for Taiwan and Kashmir. Well, some say Russia's invasion of Ukraine has started a new era. What good are political boundaries in the face of a nuclear arsenal and defiance from an authoritarian leader? Those are questions being asked around the world. China has called for de-escalation and restraint in the crisis, but many are critical of its own ambitions. Catherine Clifford has more.
Tiptoeing along a diplomatic tightrope, China's careful never to endorse Russian aggression in Ukraine, all the while refusing to condemn Putin's actions or even to use the term invasion.
在北约连续5轮东扩的情况下，俄罗斯在安全方面的正当诉求理应得到重视和妥善解决。有关各方均应保持冷静克制，避免局势进一步升级。
Though China has not held back when condemning Western sanctions, in particular the move to block some Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system, Beijing is striking a fine balance between defending sovereignty, a pillar of its foreign policy, and showing support for its close ally. China's often heard repeating that it doesn't interfere in the internal affairs of other countries and that others shouldn't interfere in its affairs. Yet the country continues to face international criticism over its own territorial claims. For example, Beijing has long sought to exert its control over the self-governing state of Taiwan. Last year, the island recorded 969 Chinese incursions into its airspace. Russia and China are one another's closest major partners. This cozy diplomatic relationship was on show at the Beijing Olympics, where Putin was one of just a few world leaders to attend. Earlier this month, the countries signed a wide-ranging strategic partnership aimed at countering US influence. They also said they would have, quote, no forbidden areas of cooperation. In a recent phone call, according to Chinese state media, Xi said China, quote, respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations and called for negotiations. According to the Kremlin, Xi told Putin that he respects Russia's actions. Meanwhile, Ukraine's #1 trading partner is China, so it's in Beijing's interest to keep up good relations with Kiev, a feat which seems increasingly difficult as Moscow's invasion intensifies.
Now, only weeks ago, Beijing and Moscow declared a no-limits partnership, the two countries backing each other over standoffs on Ukraine and Taiwan, with a promise to collaborate more against the West. For more, let's cross to London and speak to Professor Steve Tsang from SOAS University. Hello, Professor, and thank you for speaking to France 24. Western leaders have repeatedly said that Russia's invasion challenges the world order. Is that how you see it as well?
Yes, I think the world order is being changed by the invasion of Ukraine. The world is a much more dangerous place today than a week ago.
And the fear, I suppose, is that other authoritarian regimes are watching this play out and could use it to their advantage, learn how to make a military move of their own. Do you think that's what China may be doing?
Well, China is certainly watching events in Ukraine, and in particular, the Western responses to the Russian invasion with a tremendous amount of interest and care. If the Western threat to cripple the Russian economy is not being met, then the Chinese will see it as a signal that when China uses force against Taiwan, and if the Western threat to devastate the Russian economy is not delivered, then the Chinese government will think that any American threats to respond to China's invasion of Taiwan would be a bluff, and then they will probably take action accordingly.
We've seen China already tighten its grip on Hong Kong, warn Taiwan, encroach on Nepal's borders, and of course there are these tensions never ending in the South China Sea. If China were to make a military move, where do you think it would be?
Well, it will be Taiwan. Taiwan is absolutely central to the maritime strategy of China. This goes even beyond or before Xi Jinping. And if China can take Taiwan, it will have done so against American wishes, meaning that either the Americans are deterred or the Americans are defeated. Either way, it will fundamentally change the balance of power in the entire Indo-Pacific region. And with that, there's no need for China to use force elsewhere in the Pacific Ocean, and China will already have asserted its hegemony in that region.
So the stakes are clearly high. So far, I mean, we've seen remarkable unity by the West with the war in Ukraine. If China does make a move, would the West have to change anything in how it deals with Beijing from how it's dealing with Moscow?
I think if the West wants to deter China from using force against Taiwan, it will have to come up with a very strong and credible deterrence, which is more than just military deterrence, but economic deterrence involving significant cost to the Western democratic economies. If that message cannot be put to China, China cannot be deterred.
All right, Professor, thank you very much. Steve Tsang from SOAS University in London. Well, that a view of the world's most populous country. Let's now get a take from the second biggest. The war in Ukraine has also been something of a balancing act for India and also for its rival Pakistan. The nuclear-armed South Asian neighbors have been careful to avoid ascribing responsibility for the violence. Let's cross to New Delhi now and speak to our correspondent, Edward Hayward. Edward, tell us, what has media coverage and public reaction been of the war in Ukraine?
Well, as everywhere else in the world, this war has been front-page news here as well. And the most talked about topic has been the 16,000 Indian students who were stranded in Ukraine and who are still being evacuated back to India right now. But otherwise, the government's stance has been clear from the beginning. They're asking for violence to stop and dialogue to be renewed between both parties. This is what the Prime Minister has been asking over and over. And as for the public's reaction, it has been nothing like we have seen in some Western countries. There were some anti-war protests, but they were really small in comparison to the hundreds of thousands of people who have demonstrated in other countries in the West. So the public reaction in India has been mild, to say the least.
Now, we're seeing with this crisis a lot of people examining their ties with Russia. What is India's relationship with Moscow?
Well, this is a tough one for India, because even though in the last decades the relations between India and the West has been better, Narendra Modi has maintained a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin. Because it is important to understand that Russia is India's biggest weapon supplier. That's the main reason why they have refrained from joining the sanctions thus far, because 60% of the weapons used by the Indian army are of Russian origin. So already the heavy economical sanctions that have been put on Russia by the Western countries will have an enormous impact on India's defense supplies. So this is why Narendra Modi has to walk on a tightrope on this one. His government is clearly against the war in Ukraine, and he has said that many times. But India is so reliant on Russia for energy and weapons that making an enemy out of Putin would have an enormous impact on India, both politically and economically. And this is where it becomes a potential problem for Narendra Modi, because India has been working hard on improving its relationship with the West and with the US in particular. They have made defense pacts as well as trade and investment deals. And now it has been put in a really tricky situation. Western countries have clearly said that not taking a stand against Russia now is not taking a stand against what they see as an attack on Western values. So it is a difficult position for India, and its decision to remain neutral could have a lasting impact on the relations they have built with Washington in the last decade.
Yeah, also a tricky position for India's nuclear neighbor, Pakistan. And that's interesting because situated between India and Pakistan, of course, is Kashmir, a disputed territory that each side has claimed in its entirety.
Yes. So as you said, India and Pakistan have been in a continued feud around Kashmir for decades, and it has become a real problem recently when 2 years ago the Indian Prime Minister revoked the autonomous status of the Indian administered Kashmir, and it brought it completely under the direct authority of New Delhi. So at the time, his action renewed fear of a direct conflict between Pakistan and India, two nuclear powers, as you said, who are both claiming Kashmir as part of their own countries. And this is where Russia has been playing a really important role for many years as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, because India has relied on Russia's veto power at the UN to arbitrate the dispute they have with Pakistan on Kashmir. So over the years, Russia has used its veto power 4 times in favor of India. They did it in 1957, they did it in 1962 and 1971 to stop a resolution seeking UN intervention in Kashmir. And more recently, of course, in 2019, they were the first permanent member of the UN Security Council to describe India's move on Kashmir as a purely internal matter. So it was really important for India to keep this relationship with Russia like it was. And the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was meeting Vladimir Putin in Moscow on the day Russia was invading Ukraine. So it is now more than ever imperative that New Delhi keeps good relations with the Kremlin in order to protect its interests in the Kashmir conflict.
All right, Edward. Thank you very much. Edward Hayward speaking to us from New Delhi. Well, that brings us to the end of this special edition of Access Asia. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.
Discovered underground in Serbia's Jadar region, jadarite just might be considered miraculous, at least by the Serbian government and the Rio Tinto mining multinational. They see this lithium derivative as the ideal source of raw materials to produce European electric batteries. But environmentalists and locals disagree.
Ugroženi smo jednom velikom kompanijom.
Entire ecosystems destroyed, severe illnesses appearing. Lithium mining causes untold damage. After 5 months of protests, the Serbian government announced the project's cancellation. But as general elections loom, many suspect political motivation behind the decision.
Da će oni zaista sprovesti nešto nakon izbora.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.